All right, welcome back to another video of Springfield Leather here. I'm Ryan again. Today we're going to go over patterns, how to interpret them, what you're looking at, and kind of how to read a pattern once you get one. We're going to go over a few different options here today. I've got, first thing we're going to touch is one of our patterns here. This is a new one on its way, so if it doesn't look familiar, don't worry, that's normal. This is a digital print pattern, so you'll print it at home, so we'll show kind of how those look and how to operate with those. We're going to go over some tooling patterns from Jim Linnell. These are some wallet backs he's designed the tooling patterns for that we carry, and they're just gorgeous and a great way to see what a tooling pattern looks like and how to read those. And last but not least, we're going to go over one of Chris Andre's patterns from Slickballed Leather here. It's a couple holster patterns. Just kind of want to show you what some other folks' patterns look like. It's going to be different than ours, different markings, kind of a different visual language, but a lot of it is going to be translatable. You shouldn't have too much trouble switching from one to the other. So let's go ahead and dig into it. So we will get these out of the way here, and we're going to start with one of our patterns. Now this is a, like I said, it's a new one. It's on its way still, but you'll always have kind of a cover sheet with those. Once we get inside, we've got a digital pattern. So you'll see our digital patterns start off with a check print size reference. This is extremely important. So when you print a digital pattern, me and Anderson have set it up to where it is formatted to print at 100% scale. So when you're in your print dialog, make sure you don't click fit to page or 80% or anything like that. Have actual size checked, or if you're not sure if your computer has that, you can go to custom scaling and do it 100%. That way it prints accurately, but you can always check it. Hold a ruler up. This should be a 1x1 square, and this should be a 6-inch long line. We have both just so you can get an idea of if it's off, how bad it's off. So now we can go into the first pages of the pattern, and you'll see they have these letter designations on them. That will tell you kind of the order of the pages. You can also see how they line up. So they all have these dashed cut lines on them. Those lines let you know where to trim that page off. When I assemble these, I'll trim one of my pages that match up and overlap them so I have a little bit of a border there to tape or glue them together. But all it is line up your artwork across these cut lines. All right, so now I'm going to go over just some of our standard symbols and markings you'll see on Springfield Leather Company patterns. So on every part of a pattern, you'll see the name of the pattern right here at the top, the name of the part you're currently looking at, and a part count, so that way if you've got your patterns stuck in a folder somewhere, you can make sure you didn't lose any pieces, as well as the recommended weight of leather and however many of that piece you need to cut. And that will be on every piece for every pattern we make. Another thing you'll see a lot of is this black dotted line, this short black dashed line. That is our stitch lines. So if you see that, you know you're stitching around that part. Your solid black lines are going to be your cut lines. Pretty straightforward, cut out your pieces. We'll also have these little circles here, or this cutout here. You know, cutting out a zipper slot, punching holes. Those are going to be sized correctly. So if you don't have size markings on your punches that match what we recommend in the booklet, you can always just hold up a punch and see what seems about right. Because I know some companies use measurements, some use numbers. Like you can have a number 4 punch. Might be 1/8 inch, might be 3/16, hard to tell. But you can always check those those circles. They'll be the size we recommend for the hardware we recommend. Any other markings will have a little bit of text referencing what they are. Like here, we've got a center reference. So on another piece, we will have another center reference line, which actually is right on our cut line here. But that is how you'll line up those two pieces. It'll reference it in the instructions usually. Another thing you'll notice is this diagonal hatching out here around this line. That always means to skive on our patterns. If we put that in there, that's an area you're going to want to thin out. We will specifically reference that in the instructions if it's a pattern that comes with instructions. But if you have lost the instructions or are like me and just like bullying your way through leatherworking projects, that's what that means, is skive. Every time from a Springfield Leather pattern. And really, that is the basics of how to read and use a Springfield leather pattern. One tip I can say, based on at least the ones I've drawn, I always draw them to where you want to cut on the outside of the outer line. So on your black cut lines, cut away from your part on it, because that black line is exactly the size of the piece. Now again, the weight of that line, if you cut inside, cut outside, you're not going to hurt your project. It'll be just fine. All right, and that's basically how our patterns work. We're going to move on to the next set. All right, now we're going to look at some of Chris Andre's slick balled revolver patterns. He's got this cool cover to his big instruction booklets on his patterns. You certainly won't find yourself stuck on what to do for any part of his projects. But now let's look at a full-size printed pattern. You can see this is one you wouldn't be able to print at home, but it is one that can be printed all on one sheet if you got the right printer. He labels his parts really similar to how we do. Just kind of tells you what's what, marks his fold lines. But you'll notice his don't have quite as many markings as ours do. And that's not because he put less effort into it or anything like that. It's just his fit is a little simpler on a revolver. If he did a much more complicated fit-up pattern, he'd have more markings too. But you can see he does the same thing with his holes. Those are the size the hole needs to be. So even if you don't have a punch, you can cut it out by hand. But on these, what I always recommend, especially on a revolver pattern like this, it's a little hard to tell what's facing up, what's facing down. Fortunately, slick balled patterns, he marks the way you want to face your pattern pieces based on whether it's right or left-handed. Some makers don't do that, and it's really great that he does. It helps a lot. And another good thing to do is when you've got big patterns like this, cut them out on Bondtex. We always recommend that because then it's reusable and you can test fit things. Because Bondtex is firmer than paper, but paper still follows the same rules as leather as far as bending. So always try to test fit up your paper pattern if you want to. I recommend it. But really, with interpreting a pattern like this, it's really straightforward. You've got the different pieces labeled, the different punches you need to do, and your fold lines. So with this and the instructions, it really walks you through the process. It's not nearly as intimidating as it looks as soon as you take it out of the package. A full print pattern, cut out your pieces, and get to town following the instructions. Now we're going to move on to tooling patterns. These are completely different in how you read it. On the other patterns we've gone over so far, if there is a solid black line, that's where you cut. That is a pretty universal feature of construction patterns. But tooling patterns, you'll notice, are looking a little different. So we'll just look at this first one here. It's got plenty of detail for us to go over. Get all the others out of the way so we don't get too much visual clutter. So we can see here, we've got our photo reference, something most tooling patterns include. Jim always does. It's fantastic. And then we've got our line work pattern. So this is what you will actually trace onto your leatherwork. So this is a bifold wallet back. You can see here the outline of the size of wallet back he's suggesting for this. If that's a little too big, a little too small for your project, see how you can make it fit. But in general, when you're reading these, you see solid lines, those are your swivel knife cuts. So when you trace this on your leather, you will actually cut all of these solid lines with your swivel knife. And these dotted lines, just mark them when you're tracing your pattern as a reference point. They're not truly cut in. And on this pattern, you can see here, that's where he's setting his cedar, is this dotted line. That cedar you don't want cut in because you don't want it to have a hard edge like you do on all these beveled areas. Now, for where to use what tools, there's not really a good way to put that on your line work pattern. That's why most folks include a photo reference like Jim does. And on Jim's here, you can see he has his tools listed out down below. They're not SKUs to specific tools from a specific store. But if you look up C454, you're going to find the same camouflager from any retailer. A lot of them you'll notice, I get questions about our Al Stolman tooling patterns, I know with some of Jim's as well, are vintage tools. So they won't be an exact match to something we carry or something another company would carry. But you can often find out what it looks like and find a close match either in your collection or with us. That's something to know as always. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions. But on tooling patterns, you won't get a lot more detail than this on your patterns. Even looking at older figure carving patterns like Al Stolman designs, they're extremely complex patterns with a lot of really intricate work, but a lot of that is through learning and reading the process. It will still look about like this. You'll just have a lot more dotted reference lines on an Al Stolman pattern than you do on a standard tooling pattern. But really the way you use these, instead of just cutting it out and tracing it on your leather to cut it out, what I like to do is I will cover the back of this in packing tape. Then I will cut this out, just this rectangle of my wallet back, line it up on my leather, trace it if I don't have a wallet back cut out already with my outside edges. Then I will wet my leather, lay this over the top of it with a piece of tape or something to hold it down tight so it doesn't move on me, and use a stylus or even a ballpoint pen. I like a red pen because I can see where I've traced, and trace these lines exactly. That will imprint them into your wet leather. Then you can go back with your swivel knife and start carving. If you want to make this reusable, that's why I do the packing tape on the back. If you don't want to cut it out, you want to keep these together, bind them in a binder, something like that, you can always just put this in a plastic sleeve and then use your stylus over it. That way you're not marking on the paper and you're not getting the paper wet from the back. For that, binder sleeves work great as long as you get them fit tight. If you're not worried about it, you can use just paper on wet leather. You can only do it once though. You're not going to get 2 tracings out of that because it will tear. But really, tooling patterns, very simple, very easy to read, and it's just, again, a lot of learning, looking at your photo reference to place the tools that are recommended. In general, though, you shouldn't have too much trouble following these patterns. Tooling patterns that we produce and put in our own designs, they're going to have almost the same kind of visual layout to them. There's, again, a pretty universal language to tooling patterns. All right, so thanks as always for joining us here today. I hope I gave you some more information rather than just more questions to ask. But if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out. And don't be intimidated by patterns. When you open it, it's a lot of just blank lines and a lot of words and a lot of symbols. They're pretty standard, pretty consistent, and as always, keep your instructions handy. But other than that, happy crafting, and please pick up some patterns, take a look. Enjoy.